Welcome to the Total Soccer Show, and a show that we definitely don't put out meekly. It's USMNT Weekly. Today, we're casting our eye over the Nations League preliminary roster, and maybe we'll see what kind of success that group will foster. And we'll look at some of the big names who are thriving abroad and ask why Christian Pulisic's recent form has been slightly flawed. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today, it's two of the biggest USMNT voice pieces and tastemakers in the Western Hemisphere, if I don't say so myself. First off, Taylor Rockwell. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, Ryan. That is high praise, and I do appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hosting a USMNT show. Ryan, if you had to choose, would you rather host a USMNT show for like 45 to 60 minutes, or would you rather host a show in which Joe and I talk about Survivor for 45 to 60 minutes?
The first one, definitely.
Okay, that's what I figured. Okay, I wasn't sure, though. I could go either way, but I feel like both could be punishing in their own different ways.
I really hope the second one's not an option, frankly, Taylor.
Just wait.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Surprise recording session immediately after this one.
And you're forced to be there. Woo!
Yep.
Joe Lowry, hello, Joe.
Hey, I didn't think of myself as a tastemaker until very recently. And by very recently, I mean when someone tagged me on social media with Big Ange calling assists the most useless statistic in world football. So, Ryan, I think you might be spot on. Today's a good day for me.
It is. Well, actually, Joe, maybe yesterday was a good day for you. You looked very prim and proper in your corduroy jacket yesterday, which you're not wearing today. So maybe your tastemaker status has gone down a bit. Just
I felt like it would be a bit tacky to wear it back to back. I definitely do wear the same things back to back on the Thursday, Friday shows because we record them back to back, and I don't feel like I'm really necessarily led to change outfits between that. Unlike Graham, who is committed to the bit. I think you might be right, but I felt like I didn't want to go back to back, Ryan.
Very good. Wise choice, Joe. If you'd like to see our outfits or our faces or have some visual accompaniment to this here podcast, you can check us out on YouTube. Link in show notes. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show is also where you'll find our bonus content, and it's the best way to support this here endeavor. Bonus episodes, bonus video, and of course, access to our Discord server. All the cool kids are there. Come join them. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show.
All the cool kids are there discussing expected assists versus expected goals versus actual assists. Only the coolest kids apply.
Is that real? Is that happening right now in the Discord,
know.
Taylor?
At any given moment, probably.
I love it.
Hey, Taylor, we can't all be tastemakers in the Western Hemisphere like yourself.
Yes. Me wearing my T-shirt and hat so you don't have to see my hair. Tastemaker extraordinaire.
Indeed. All right, why don't we get straight to it, gentlemen? The USMNT, Nations League preliminary roster. Almost went full title there. That would have been too long. The prelim roster is out. It came out on Monday. It's a 60-person squad. Can I start off asking Taylor, why is there 60? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to get down to 23 by March 10th? Why is it a thing?
I am sure there are some sort of rules and regulations in place about having to notify clubs and make sure that like there's no conflicts or anything like that. But I think it's just fun, personally. I think it's just fun to get to see what the pool looks like. If it were 70, I would be happy if it were 70. If it were 80, maybe now we're pushing it into kind of ridiculous territory. But I like seeing who is on the radar. Also interesting to see who is not on the radar for different reasons. So I'm assuming there are official reasons that maybe Joe knows, maybe somebody else knows. But I'm guessing part of it is to make sure you don't have conflict. Like I think Aiden Morris was once on USA and Canada's provisional roster. I may have that wrong. But I think maybe you have to make sure that there's no conflict, there's no overlap. But then also like let clubs know you might be considering a player.
Yeah. It just feels, Joe, it feels to me like Hard Knocks when there's like 60 or 70 people and then, oh, you've been working your whole life for this. By the way, you're done now. Good luck with the rest of your life. It's not quite that dramatic, obviously, but for 2/3 of players who are on this list and then don't get selected, it feels kind of harsh, doesn't it?
No.
Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just jump in to say, Ryan, I want to extend that analogy further, and I'm now I'm scrolling this very, very quickly to find somebody who I don't think is going to be in the team. Like maybe Tanner Tessman shows up to USMNT training.
Oh, he's going to be on this team.
And his key card won't work. And it's like, wait, what's going on now? That's the worst part of Hard Knocks when they don't tell the player beforehand, so they can't even get into the facility. It's like, I'm pretty sure you're cut, buddy. I'm sorry. Tanner Tessman, I don't know if you are, but for purposes of this conversation, I threw you in there.
Spoiler alert, Tanner Tessman is totally in my roster for this camp, and I absolutely think he's going to be there. I'll sub Tanner Tessman for Caden Clark in that analogy, and I'm on board, Taylor. I also agree with Taylor. I like this. I believe there are these sorts of provisional rosters for other windows as well. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but players are sort of notified when they make this large pool of players for a roster, and then they're notified if they make the next roster. I suppose if they don't, they'll pick up on that fairly quickly. I agree. I think stories are good. I like seeing giant pools of players that could or could not play for the U.S. men's national team. This is like directly into my veins. Also, Ryan, how dare you say that the Concacaf Nations League USMNT preliminary 60-man roster is not as dramatic as somebody getting cut in the NFL? I mean, that is just sickening. It's just absolutely sickening.
It's all a matter of perspective, I suppose, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing 60 key cards being mailed out in special golden envelopes. Will your key card work when you get to the door? You'll find out.
Dude, don't give them ideas. That feels like a reality show that they might actually pursue.
Netflix is commissioning it as we speak. All right, Joe, I can read out 60 names, or we can take an alternate approach.
The second,
here.
that one, that one, the alternative one.
Yeah, the alternative one being, let's pick out a bunch of players that we're excited to see in this squad. Joe, I'll let you kick off a few players you're excited to see included.
Yeah, I will. And maybe before I do that, just to fill in a little bit of context here for dear listener, this roster will be whittled down to 23 players, as we've talked about already, for the CONCACAF Nations League Final Four that is coming up in March. The U.S. is playing Panama in the semifinals of that tournament on March 20th, and then they'll either be in the final or the semifinal against Canada or Mexico on that Sunday. So either they'll play early on Sunday or they'll play late on Sunday. USMNT fans will want them to play late on Sunday because that is the final. So we're less than a month away from those games, and that is why this preliminary roster is here, and we'll see this whittled down and talk about it more when the official roster is announced next month, which is like 3 days away because February is a weird thing. In terms of some names that stood out to me from this overall pool, I'll pick a couple, and then I'll flip it to you, Taylor. Noah Banks is the big one for me. I think he is still somebody who is not fully in this USMNT pool, and I don't know if he's going to be in the final roster. But man, one thing I do know is that center back is a position of need, both now and in the future for this U.S. team. Another thing that I know is that Banks is a really talented young player. I don't know, here's something I don't know, if he's actually ready to contribute to the U.S. men's national team. I sort of suspect that he is maybe not quite there yet. But at 18, and somebody who can be a fourth center back on a roster for, let's face it, a not super high profile competition, this is the moment. This is, I think, a great opportunity to bring him in and do what Pochettino has done with Diego Coquin, who's come in as this third or fourth goalkeeper in multiple camps so far in his USMNT career, and let him feel what the atmosphere is. Like Coquin, Banks is also a dual national. Not that I think Germany is necessarily going to be banging down the door for him, but you never know what can happen. Linear development is not linear, and I really like Banks' profile. So his name absolutely popped out to me here. The other one that I'll take, because I get to go first, is Cole Campbell, who's on this list. 19 years old, winger, has played multiple times for Borussia Dortmund this year, has more recently been back down with the second team in the third division over in Germany. He is not, I think, ready for the senior team in terms of actually playing meaningful minutes. I don't think he's fast enough. I don't think he's strong enough, especially the physical side of his game, I think is lagging a bit. But I think he's super technical, and I think he's a fun player with a bright future. The exact same reasoning that I use for Coquin, that I use for Banks, is why I would be very interested to see Campbell come in as the, 23rd man on this roster. I just don't see a lot of downside to experimenting a little bit in these couple of windows, especially because Poch just doesn't have much time left to evaluate this pool.
Can I just say, we've got Kate Cowell, Cole Campbell, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Caden Clark.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similar consonant sounds going on in this team. Is there a lack of originality in naming in the USMNT at this point?
We were talking before we started recording officially, listener, about the most British name of all time and the most American name of all time. There are like 12 of the most American names of all time in this 60-man squad.
It is. I think it is representative of a time period and the trendiness of names. There should be like a Jaden or a Braden in the team to really drive that point.
They're coming.
Alas, we don't have those. We will soon. I think you're right. Joe, I had Noki Banks on there. Noki Banks, whatever we're going to go with for him. I do think it would be interesting to see if he accepts the call, because obviously he has German eligibility, or if he is maybe brought in as a like surplus to the roster player where he's in training but not in the roster, but at the same time hasn't really been called up by Germany, hasn't been in any German youth national teams to my knowledge. So it does feel like if he were called up, he would accept and would be there. It wouldn't cap tie him. I think he could still file a one-time switch depending on how many he plays, but it would still be really exciting to have him in the team because of the center back issues. So I agree with you, Joe. Would you be okay if he came as that sort of like 24th man who isn't playing but training?
Totally. Yeah, I have no issues with that whatsoever. I don't know, and this is where my memory lets me down, I don't know if that's something that's super likely for a competitive window, right? In contrast to the last month where there are 25 players, the last camp, full camp in November, where Poch brings in 25 guys. You can bring as many players as you want to a friendly. A window, I would imagine you can absolutely do the same thing. I just don't know if Pochettino is actually going to do that. I suppose, though, the November window is competitive too, just not a Final Four situation.
So I think the other players that I'm most excited about, so I had Banks on there. I think it tends to be, when I first look at rosters, kind of new players who could kind of break through or could be really exciting, and then also players who I'm excited to see again after their last appearances. And I kind of have two of each. Banks would be one of the newbies, as would Damian Downs, who's in a similar situation to Banks in that he could play Damian Downs for Germany, I believe, but could play for the United States. Has had a breakthrough season in the two Bundesliga, and with Köln scoring a bunch of goals, 9 goals, I think, in 16 starts, and has had a really strong season. So I wouldn't mind seeing him brought in just to see what he can do with the team, how he fits in, to give him that similar kind of taste of the team. But with the lack of number 9s, with the injuries, with the kind of lack of consistent firepower for the U.S., I think any potential options there are going to be exciting. So those are two names from the newbie debutant category. And then from the January camp, I was really enjoying a lot of what we saw from Jack McGlynn. I think you could still see some of the kind of inexperience there, some of the kind of like need to raise his level. And so I think it'd be interesting to see him called into camp. I don't know if we will. I think he's maybe one of my question mark candidates for like my final center mid spot. But I liked what I saw from him in January. So I think it would be interesting if we saw him return to the team. I didn't like as much of what I saw from Max Arfsten in the January camp, but fullback is even more of a problem than I thought it was already because of all of the injuries we have. Trying to come up with a 23-player roster, there are not many options there. And so Arfsten, who is listed as a midfielder, I should note, but maybe that's because he's considered like a winger, wingback, fullback option. So I think maybe seeing him called in would have been a surprise until I looked at the depth or lack thereof. And now having him involved, I think, could be interesting because maybe that was January nerves and debut kind of jitters that he's gotten out of the way, and now we can see how he does in a competitive fixture potentially.
Is January nerves a phrase I'm not aware of?
No, but that's what I'm calling it. Basically, just going into a camp and sort of recognizing like, oh, I'm playing for the U.S. now. I have to be really good. I feel like you could see just some of that tightness, some of that maybe errant passing that felt to me more like nerves than it was a lack of ability.
Yeah, I think all that stuff is fair. The other couple of names, and these sort of fit more into the category of we've seen them before in bits and spurts, and I would love to see them again, group that you mentioned, Taylor. The first, and I kind of think this guy is the most likely to appear in the actual 23-man squad of any player that's been mentioned so far, is Patrick Agyemang, who I know Ryan will be very excited about. Didn't look amazing in week 1 in MLS for Charlotte. Charlotte in general, Ryan said it, 100% right. So I do think with all the injuries to the striker spot, no Pepe, no Balogun, no Wright, Damian Downs is an option. I think Agyemang is probably higher up that pecking order to be the guy maybe behind Josh Sargent in this window, but also lots of other players who could get the call. Ferreira could potentially get this call. Vasquez, Jordan Morris scored a brace over the weekend. He's a very capable number 9 in these kinds of games. I think there are lots of options there, but Agyemang feels like he played so well in January and has such a unique profile that he's somebody who might actually get the call coming up in March. And the other two names, one of whom I think is more likely to make this roster than the other. Brian Gutierrez is the first. I think he is less likely to make this roster. I don't know, man. I was just really impressed with how he looked for Chicago over the weekend. I think I said it yesterday. I wasn't especially high on Gutierrez coming into this season. I don't think he's ever been a very impressive pure number 10, but he played as more of a left-sided free 8 for Berhalter and looked stronger and quicker and more decisive in basically everything that he did. And that's interesting to me. So Gutierrez is at the very least a player that I'm excited to see in a pool like this and would like to see more of. Of course, we've seen him with the U.S. in bits and spurts in the past. And the last name, who I think could make this cut and is on my 23-player roster, is Diego Luna, who I thought looked like the dude for RSL over the weekend against San Jose, not least because all the other the dude candidates were on the bench rotated for CCC play. But man, he looked like the one RSL player who was capable of turning that game on its head in that left half space as this kind of narrow attacking midfield type. He looked good, and he's looked good for the U.S. before. He did it in January camp. He's a player he's a profile, that not a lot of other U.S. players can mirror or can even replicate parts of. Seeing Luna's name on this list, always fun, and he's a guy who I think honestly does have something to offer this team in a real way.
Two things. First off, Joe, I suspect you will know the answer to this, but some people might not, so I'll ask you anyway. How old is Diego Luna? Because I did not know that, and when I found out, it blew my mind.
What is he, 22?
21.
21.
But yeah, he's another one I would have said like, 24. He's been around for a long time. I don't know. 21 is younger than I expected. So I would love to see him involved because I think we could see him continue to develop and become a strong part for the U.S. I don't know if he will make this team, but I agree. I'm pretty hyped about Diego Luna. My other question, I'm pretty sure I understood what you meant there, but I just wanted to ask you to clarify. When you say Jordan Morris is good for these types of games,
yeah, you know what I meant.
What do you mean?
Know
What do
I
you
mean.
mean, Joe?
Everybody knows what I mean. The U.S. is playing Panama, and then they'll be playing Canada or Mexico. And I don't have anything else to say. Thank you very much.
Let's see. How old is Diego Luna's spider tattoo, by the way?
also 21.
Younger than 21 is my guess.
Presumably.
But we're not really sure.
Yeah, we'll find out. All right, Taylor. Any other players you're excited about? Actually, is there anyone who is missing? It's remiss that they're missing as well. Who has the indignity of not being in the top 60 at this point, Taylor?
Yeah. Well, so there's a few things to note here. So we've got around 10 or so players who are injured. Some of who I think would be in the full squad if they were not injured. Some would be in this provisional roster. Some might not be. Malik Tillman, Ricardo Pepi, Serginho Dest, all with PSV, all still out. Haji Wright, Balogun, James Sands broke his leg, which is a shame because he had started to put in some good performances for St. Pauli, but he's going to be out for a while. Kevin Paredes has been out for a while, so too is Jordan Pefok. Caleb Wiley has a hurt shoulder. And very recently, John Tolkien has a thigh injury. He is still listed on this provisional roster, but I don't think he is expected back in time to be fully fit. So it feels unlikely he is going to make this team, though he is in that provisional squad. In terms of just straight up omissions, Gaga Slonina is not involved, the young goalkeeper, I think because of just the erratic nature of his form and his loans and everything this season. Taylor Booth, Roxas Puskás, who we've talked about previously, not involved. Leonard Maloney, who got his move to Mainz in January, but isn't playing very much at present and maybe would have been on the outside anyway. We'll see if he ends up breaking through. And then the most notable one potentially would be Richie Ledesma, or Richard Ledesma, or maybe Ricardo.
Ricardo.
Yeah,
Ricardo.
I decided he's Ricardo. Right back for PSV. I think would have been called into this camp and is fit and is in an area of need. However, there's reporting that he is waiting for a Mexican passport. He is a dual national and has indicated he would be interested in getting a call from Mexico. He is not in their provisional roster for this competition, largely because he doesn't yet have that passport. But it sounds like he's trying to keep his options open, so not in this roster, which is a shame because I think he's a good player, and I've tracked his career since he was very young, and so to see him in this position would have been fun, but him playing for Mexico might also be fun.
Indeed. Joe, any more to add there, or should we take a little breaky?
Let's break.
Let's do it. Joe has teased his 23-player final roster. Let's get his and fellow tastemaker Taylor's rosters after this interval. Back shortly. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to USMNT Weekly. As we've established, we've got the Concacaf Nations League coming up on March 20th, the USA taking on Panama. Then we've got Canada-Mexico later that evening. Love a doubleheader. Do I? Maybe I don't. Either way, it's happening. Anyway, let's talk about the 23-player rosters that we are crafting together. Taylor, would you like to go first? Maybe should we go position by position?
Sure.
Tell us about your goalkeepers first. Let's do that.
So we've got 7 of them in there. I don't know if we want to name them all. I think Joe is going to say we don't. So I would just say I think Matt Turner is still the number one until he's not. It seems like Zach Steffen has become a player that Mauricio Pochettino likes, trusts enough, and he's been solid enough for Colorado thus far in the one game.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if he's in there. And I think Patrick Schulte is number 3 for me, at least for this camp. Maybe in the future that rotates. Maybe in the future Diego Koken does get that look. But for now, I think that's my 3.
Yeah, I think that is the most likely trio that Poch is going to go with in this camp. I've got on my personal list the ones that I would like to see. Mm-hmm. Turner as the starter, Matt Freese in this, he's in the provisional, NYCFC starting goalkeeper, and Diego Koken. I would also be fine to see Patrick Schulte instead of Koken, but I really do think it's going to be Turner and Steffen at the very least, and Schulte probably as that third guy. Steffen, to his credit, was great for Colorado over the weekend against St. Louis City. He saved more goals than expected than any other goalkeeper in MLS during week 1, and made some really awesome saves along the way, which is how you get to a statistic like that. He was excellent with some quick reaction saves. I thought he looked really good, and that is an encouraging sign, Taylor, for your VSP for the Colorado Rapids, if for nothing else.
Do you want to apologize, Joe? Do you want to tell him you're sorry? You don't yet, do you?
No, I don't. I thought your VSP was that I wouldn't do that. So do you actually want me to do that?
I forget now.
You don't want me
it's
to.
been
I'm pretty sure you
almost a
don't want
week
me to.
since we did those, and they've been professionally removed from my brain. So
But
Poch
still loves Stefan more than I think anybody alive. So I do think he'll probably be in there. But it's going to be Matt Turner getting both of these games. Yeah. I'd be shocked if that wasn't the case.
Wonderful stuff. All right, that's what's cooking or coking in the goalkeepers section.
I'll give it up. I'll give it up.
Nah,
thank you. Joe, how about your defensive selections for your 23?
I split these, Taylor, into center backs and fullbacks. I don't know if you did the same. Okay, I'll start with center backs then, and then you can do yours. I have four center backs here. Chris Richards is one of them. Mark McKenzie, Tim Ream, and I do have Banks in this group of four. I don't think that's super likely. As said earlier, Taylor, I think your theory about maybe bringing him as an extra player is far more likely than it is for him to be the fourth player in this team, but it's not impossible. I think Miles Robinson probably has this inside track over Banks, but in terms of what I would like to see, I'd rather lean younger for a guy who's almost certainly not going to see the field. Bring him in, let him get acclimated to the environment of an international training camp. That's where I would go, but I would understand Poch deciding to do something else.
I had that exactly as well, with the note that McKenzie spot, because I think Banks would be a good one to call in to get him experience. Ream and Richards, I think, are somewhat locks at this point for at least this camp. And so it does leave the other center back spot. I lean McKenzie largely because Joe has consistently reminded me that feels like a Poch guy who Poch trusts.
For sure.
I'm like intrigued by the idea of bringing in Austin Trusty and Cameron Carter-Vickers and giving them a training session together or a game together and see how they play, because they play together at Celtic, and seeing that relationship. But I don't think at least CCV is good enough on the ball the way Poch would like him to be or wants his center backs to be. I'm not sure either one of them is going to really truly elevate this team, so it's kind of a toss-up there, but I lean McKenzie as my fourth center back as well. And maybe who? Oh, and you had Miles Robinson as maybe having the inside track, which is probably a fair shout.
I would think so. I would think Robinson would be the next closest. Maybe Walker Zimmerman, but Robinson seems to be that rung higher on the pecking order right now.
And then fullback. It's an issue because Serginho Dest, as I said, still out, which means Joe Scally is probably your starting right back, who maybe becomes a center back. Maybe they try to have him do attacking things. Jedi Robinson will certainly be the starting left back. I think John Tolkien would have been there as a depth option at left back, but if he is injured and cannot be in this team, then I feel like it's DeJuan Jones maybe brought in. I would have had him in my team anyway, and he can deputize at left back or right back. But I think that's where Max Arfsten becomes so intriguing. Though he is listed as a midfielder, I think you bring him in to be a more attacking option if you want to try to kind of experiment with him as a more advanced right fullback, if you maybe want two attacking fullbacks in your team instead of one of them staying home. But largely that's because I think the other options I had based on the list would be, it's basically for left back, Robinson, Tolkien, Jones, and then for right back, it's Scally, Marlon Fossey, Nathan Harriel, or Shaq Moore. I just didn't find really any of those particularly exciting, and Arfsten, for having already been there and for being so good for the crew, if not for the U.S. in January, I think makes him an intriguing option.
Yeah, you've laid it all out well, Taylor. You know who else is not very intrigued by the backup fullback options for the U.S. men's national team? Mauricio Pochettino, because in November he brought two fullbacks into this team. Yeah. He brought Jedi Robinson and he brought Joe Scally. And it honestly wouldn't shock me if he does the exact same thing in this window. He thinks there's right back cover in Yunus Musa. He thinks there's left back cover in Tim Ream. I think he's probably right about that. Not that I'm in love totally with either one of those guys playing in those spots against great teams. But again, this is not exactly what's going to happen for the U.S. in March. They're not playing Spain and England and Argentina in this window. They're not. Not to say that these are going to be walks in the park. The U.S. could absolutely lose to Panama. But man, I wouldn't be super surprised if Poch opts to bring a fifth center back, and maybe it is Robinson and Banks along with the other three that we mentioned as being a little bit more set in stone. Or maybe it is the Richards, Ream, McKenzie, and then the Celtic guys that come in together, like you're saying, Taylor. I think a 5 center back, 2 fullback complement is very, very possible if he's going to bring three fullbacks. So Jedi will be one, Scally will be another. The third guy, I don't know who it would be. DeJuan Jones was the one on my list after the Tolkien injury, but that one's bizarre because DeJuan Jones is not the kind of player that you think would get an automatic invite to a U.S. camp when he's not playing at club level. And the dude is a backup for the Columbus Crew, behind Max Arfsten, behind Mo Farsi at right wing back. It's a bizarre situation for him. It just always very, very strange. He could make the squad, or it could be an extra center back, or it could be fill in the blank fullback from the rest of the pool.
Okay. Before we leave the defensive line, by the way, we were talking about the most American names in US soccer. I'm going to put Jackson Reagan right up there. 2 president names in one name. Come on.
Yeah, that's good.
Come on.
His middle name is George Washington hyphenated. Don't look that up.
Also, if you pronounce it Jackson Reagan, you could have like a WWE kind of angle to it as well.
Oh, that's good.
I did look it up, Joe, even though you told me not to. His middle name is not a president. It is even more American, though. It's Jackson Cameron Reagan.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
James
When you
Cameron's
said not a
president.
president, I was really hoping that it was Jackson Ben Franklin Reagan, but that's fine. No worries.
Jackson Alexander Hamilton Reagan.
Yeah, right on.
It's all about the Hamiltons, baby. All right, midfield. Taylor, tell us about your midfield selections, please.
There's a lot of them. There are many midfielders. I think 22 in total in this provisional roster, which maybe speaks volumes about the different ways in which midfielders can be used, but also maybe a murkiness towards the back end of the potential midfield. But I have Adams, McKennie, Musa. I do have Aronson listed as a midfielder. I put Reyna into maybe the more forward category, though I think he might end up playing as a midfielder for this U.S. team. But that's 4 of the 6 potential spots. I honestly think Joe is probably right that maybe we see DeJuan Jones as the one kind of fullback depth option, and then it's only 2 other ones, which would then open up another midfield spot potentially. I think Johnny is probably going to be in the squad, even though I think I voted him out last time, much to the Discord's chagrin. I won't make that same mistake this time, though I still think he hasn't fully impressed with the U.S., but maybe he hasn't had ample opportunity in competitive format under Pochettino. And that leaves one more opening. I really enjoyed Luca De La Torre in the opening weekend for Major League Soccer. He would not have been on my list except for that game. But I don't think it will be him because there are so many other ones. I'm guessing that's where Joe has Tanner Tessman. But it could be Brian Gutierrez. It could be Diego Luna. It could be Jack McGlynn. Could be Aiden Morris potentially even in there. So I give the edge to Luca De La Torre, even though I think it will probably be somebody else. So that's the one, maybe more personal one than what Poch will actually do.
Yeah, I've got a lot of the same names that you do, Taylor. Some names that I have that you didn't in this group is Tanner Tessman, who I think is a lock, man. I think when I was going through this list, the first 3 guys are Adams and McKennie and Musa, and I have Reyna in this group as well. It doesn't really matter. So we'll say those are the first 4 because Gio Reyna, and we'll get onto this a bit later, is playing. He started over the weekend. He's talented enough that if he's healthy, I think you bring him in. So those 4 guys I think are locks. Honestly, the 5th guy, as I was going through this pool of midfielders that I have down, is Tanner Tessman. I think he is now maybe even ahead of where Johnny Cardoso is on the depth chart. Maybe not. But he has certainly, I think, really made a name for himself in this team. He's playing real minutes for Lyon. He's starting against PSG and looking quite good. He still has his limitations, but his upside on the ball, and if he can continue to develop against the ball, he's a really talented player. And I think he's looked good when Poch has brought him in before with this U.S. team. I would be really, really surprised if Tessman isn't involved here. So I've got, in terms of the 6s, Adams and Cardoso, I think are the pure, deeper line guys in this group. Tessman sort of is a hybrid between a 6 and an 8, but I've got him in this team. I've got Musa, like you said, Taylor, McKennie, and then as the more attack-minded guys, I have Gio Reyna, I have Brendan Aronson, and I have Diego Luna as my last guy in this category. Luna is the one that I feel the least confident in by far. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe he doesn't make this team and there's another player allocated elsewhere, or if you see, say, an Aiden Morris, who I think is probably a bit hard done by to not make this group, but I don't think it'll be a huge shock to people that I don't rate Aiden Morris as highly as, say, Tanner Tessman. But I think there's a lot of quality in this group, but I think I feel pretty good about that group of 8 players that I picked.
So did you only have 6 defenders, basically? 4 center backs and then the 2 fullbacks?
I have 7 defenders. Now I'm afraid I've done math wrong. So I've got 3 goalkeepers and 7 defenders, which brings me up to 10 players total.
Yeah.
I've got 8 midfielders, which brings me up to 18. And then I've got 5 forwards. So it sounded like you had 6 forwards, Taylor, but Gio Reyna, I had a midfielder and you had him as a forward. So it probably evens out.
Okay. I like it.
Boom.
And I think he's listed as a midfielder as well, correct?
Yeah. I just pulled him out of the way US Soccer had it listed.
Okay. Very good. All right. Taylor, why don't you give us your forwards, if you will?
Sure. So I had Reyna in there, but I think he is listed as a midfielder, so maybe I should have put him there. So maybe that gives me 7 midfielders. But yeah, Reyna involved. Josh Sargent, who's been in incredibly good form for Norwich, scoring, I want to say 29 goals in 4 games or something like that. It's not that.
It's actually 34, Taylor. You're almost there.
Excuse me. It's 7 goals in 6 games. That's not a bad rate of return. It'll be nice to see Josh Sargent being the clear number 1, number 9, basically, for this team because of those injuries. I don't think we've seen a situation in which he comes in without that sort of like, you better perform, you're going to get 30 minutes in one game, you better shine. I think without Pepe, without Balogun, it is clearly Josh Sargent as the starting number 9 for the U.S., and then we'll see if he rises to the occasion, because at times he has not, at times he hasn't maybe had the opportunity, but under Pochettino, I'm really excited in a competitive competition to see what he can do. So I have it as Sargent, I have Weah, Reyna, Pulisic as my locks. That leaves 2 more positions open. And I think with some sort of like maybe Aronson can play wide, maybe Reyna can play wide if required. I just went with number 9s because I still think it's an area of concern. So I have Patrick Agyemang because he is the best, and we all know that he will eventually be the starting goal scorer for probably Real Madrid. And then Damian Downs of FC Colm because I want to see something different and see what he can do in training. So I went with 3 number 9s, which is unlikely, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think that's actually totally possible, Taylor. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. It feels like Pulisic, Weah, and Sargent are total locks for this forward group, and the other 2 slots, if we put Reyna in midfield, just conceptually, the other 2 slots are basically a toss-up. It seems like Agyemang has that inside track. He's on my list as well. I just went, and I trailed this earlier, I just went with Cole Campbell over Damian Downs because I don't think there's almost any scenario where Damian Downs is playing for the U.S. at the 2026 World Cup. And I think there is a scenario in which Cole Campbell is doing that, but it is, I mean, it's like 0.1% to 0%, right? It doesn't really matter. So I would love to see Campbell. I would also be totally fine to see Downs, or I'd even be fine to see a less speculative pick. Like maybe you bring Morris back into this team. Maybe Ferreira, who I think is a good player, and I really like his profile. Maybe Pochettino finds some way to really get something out of Jesus Ferreira for this team. I think there's a lot of ways that could be gone here. And it just is hard for me to put up a ton of passion behind exactly which way Pot should go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm similar to you, Joe, where I think if you do drop one of those number 9s, be it Downs or Agyemang, maybe it's Brandon Vasquez, who now with his club situation settled, maybe he gets a look. Maybe it's Jordan Morris, to your point. Maybe it's Jesus Ferreira. The other wide attacking option that I wanted to shout out, it's a player who I have been underwhelmed is maybe praise when it comes to the USMNT, but it's Alex Zendejas, who I think he has been a player for me who has been sort of like, let's check in with him every 6 months. Oh, okay, let's check in with him again in 6 months because he doesn't really perform or elevate the team. But he has been in very good form for Club America. I think 4 goals and 3 assists in his last 7 games, if my math is correct. And by all accounts, has been playing really, really well for them. I read American Soccer Now's quick little profile of what he's been doing there. So maybe he is in the conversation. He is listed last amongst the forwards, though it should be noted that's alphabetically because he has Zendejas for a last name.
Very nice. Wonderful name it is too. Joe, did we get all your forwards? Or are we
Yes, we did. Can I give my lineup before we go to break? Because I think this is a helpful way to sort of run this through and give people an idea of the strength of this U.S. team. And Taylor, I'm curious if you would differ from this in certain areas. There's still no Serginho Dest, as he's still recovering from that ACL injury, which I think makes this kind of easy, to be honest. Not that Poch couldn't pull out a wrinkle, because he did that recently with Jedi Robinson playing in central midfield in possession. But here's how I would line this team up. Defensively first, I'll start, and then I'll shift into the attacking shape. Matt Turner in goal, flat back four with Joe Scally, Mark McKenzie, Chris Richards, and Jedi Robinson across that back line. Probably defending with then a 4 bank in midfield, but this doesn't really matter. I'd have Tim Weah on the right. I'd have Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams in midfield, and Christian Pulisic on the left. And then in that front two, I would have Josh Sargent and Gio Reyna as that 2 forward group defensively. And then in possession, and we've seen Poch do this a lot so far, I would shift to that 3-2-5 and just keep Joe Scally home at right back to join with Richards and McKenzie in the back line. And my wide attackers would be Jedi Robinson bombing forward from left back to be the wide attacker on the left. Tim Weah to be that width provider on the right side. I'd have the double pivot of Adams and McKennie. And then in the half spaces, I would have Pulisic on the left and Gio Reyna on the right with Josh Sargent up top. I think that's totally possible. And I think, Taylor, that is like the most reasonable way to get the best players on the field. Would also be more than happy to see Musa start over Scally. I just don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, I would love to see Musa start over Scally specifically if that were an option. But I agree with you, Joe. I think it's Scally starting at right back, becoming that right center back. And that's why I have Weah as well. In the past, I've kind of waffled on that one because Musa has started in that kind of right wing spot for the USMNT under Pochettino. However, I don't think he adds enough to the attack. I don't think he creates enough individually. And if you then have Joe Scally staying home at right center back, not a lot of creativity out wide. So I think that is Tim Weah. I think that also maybe is an interesting solution to what happens when Serginho Dest is back, is that maybe if Dest is back and fully fit, then it's Musa. Dest can bomb forward. Musa can kind of maybe just stay a little bit more conservative and do some of the defensive covering stuff, so you could have that kind of double set partnering each other. But other than that, I had the exact same lineup that you did with not much experimentation. So, yeah, there we go. Josh Sargent, I'm excited for you. Gio Reyna, I think, would not have been in my starting 11 if he hadn't played this weekend. I would have much more concern about his lack of minutes for Dortmund. But truthfully, now that he is, I guess, theoretically back in their starting 11 and going to be getting consistent minutes, I don't see how you keep him out of the team.
Whoa, going to be getting consistent minutes. Slow down there, Cowboy. We'll see about that.
Yeah. He pulled his hamstring. Sorry.
I felt that somehow. Yeah. I felt it.
Wow. It was in the wind.
All right.
There we go. All right. So as noted, on March 10th, this will be whittled down by 2/3 to a 23-person squad.
Ryan, how mad would you be if, 2 weeks from now, they whittled it down to
45?
We had to do another show.
No, they extend it to 80 next week. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to see, really, here. Just to create extra drama for that Netflix show with the envelopes and the key cards. Very good. All right. The Concacaf Nations League semi-finals coming up in the March window. More on that on USMNT Weekly in the coming weeks. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about some of the big US stars doing it in Europe, including, but not limited to, Christian Pulisic. News from him. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to USMNT Weekly. Let's start off, Joe, if we can, with Christian Pulisic, who's been in some less than Pulisic standard form, shall we say, lately. Still a great season overall, of course, he's having with Milan. Vital in that Super Cup win, 6 goals and 6 assists in the league. But, of course, we're missing the penalty over the weekend. He is goalless in 7 games. Rumours that he might have fallen out with Sergio Conceição as well. Those rumours, perhaps unfounded, though. We are seeing, Joe, in the press as we record on Wednesday that Milan and Pulisic have agreed a contract extension, which will see him staying at the club through to 2029. That's not confirmed. That is a report we're seeing. So what are we making of Pulisic in this present moment, Joe, and his future prosperity with Milan?
I'm not super worried about Pulisic. It has been a bad stretch, as you said, Ryan, that AC Milan get knocked out of the Champions League, and then he goes and misses that penalty against Torino. Hasn't been quite starting every game. I think some of that is just bare minutes management. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm not worried. We've seen Christian Pulisic hit real highs here, and that contract extension that's been reported earlier today that you're mentioning, Ryan, I think is an indication of the obvious value that AC Milan see in Christian Pulisic. So there's going to be ebbs and flows. I just don't think that there's a world in which those things average out to anything less than him being a very good player for AC Milan and still the most important player for the USMNT and obviously one of the greatest players the US has ever produced. Taylor, did you read much about this penalty? Ryan, you as well? I don't know if you all did a lot of reading about this. So Ryan said it. He missed that penalty against Torino. Milan lose that game. Taylor, if you had to guess, how many penalties has Christian Pulisic missed throughout his entire career?
Not many, I don't think.
One?
One is the correct answer. Yeah. He has missed the one penalty. It was this one against Torino. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that Pulisic was so consistent from the spot. Obviously, he has scored important penalties for the U.S. in the past.
How many has
Ren, you mentioned 12, according to the internet. I haven't officially gone back and looked at all these myself. But yeah, he's a very good penalty taker, as it turns out. Ryan, you mentioned the rumblings about Sergio Conceição, which I think you guys talked about on a Patreon episode fairly recently as well. Milan came out and put a Pulisic quote basically condemning those rumors on their social media. I don't know. I have a hard time getting riled up about that stuff. Pulisic has more staying power at Milan than Conceição does. I don't really think that's a huge risk. The one thing as it relates to the March window for the US, which is a lot of what we're talking about on this show, I think that window could come at a really good time for him where, there's a couple more games for Milan between now and then, but then you get to go be with your boys, right? Christian Pulisic likes being in camp with the U.S. men's national team. He enjoys hanging out with these players. I think this is a good time for him just to come in and actually maybe get a bit refreshed and rejuvenated from an international camp. So we're not quite there yet. And I think Pulisic will get back and maybe even find the score sheet between now and then. But I do think the timing of this March window and this new contract, if it becomes official, is encouraging.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely very encouraging, Joe. And that's what I kind of focus in on when it comes to the whole drama around Pulisic and wanting a new manager and whatever. I don't really buy into that, as it sounds like you don't, Joe. But I think that contract extension is very meaningful because Serie A clubs on the whole, I mean, they have money, don't get me wrong. Milan are doing fine. But less money certainly than the Premier League. And I think, honestly, even than like Pulisic could make if he moved to Major League Soccer. I think the salary he could command would be double, triple, maybe what Milan are going to be paying him with this extension. But for Milan, it's a sizable investment into a player for the future. And that tells me that they are kind of banking on him being a marquee name for them and a key performer for them for a good long while. And I think that then, if I'm kind of doing a little bit of like media conspiracy here, is where I think some of this story has come from. It's just that I think Pulisic is the name for this Milan team at present, certainly from a U.S. perspective, obviously, but I think globally, like he's a known player, and he's a known player for this Milan team who's been in great form. When a new manager comes in and they don't hit the ground running and there are potential issues or potential disruptions, I think oftentimes the first thing newspapers do and media reporters do is sort of look at like, well, how's the key player doing and how unhappy is he? And I think that's where some of the kind of agitation comes from there. And so if anything, I feel like it's like, oh, Pulisic is like the man for this Milan team, and now they're going to be using him as the kind of like indicator of how things are going for the club. If that makes any sense. It makes sense to me, I hope. But for a broader perspective, I would just say that I think the contract extension is really positive. I think that it's a weird situation with Milan where you have two new attacking arrivals. You're trying to fit in the thus far not particularly fab four. And I think trying to accommodate João Felix, trying to accommodate other attackers means fewer touches for Pulisic, fewer minutes. I think Concacaf earlier in the week, or maybe in the weekend, said Pulisic doesn't have 90 minutes in his legs at present. I think the implication there was overuse and just trying to use him so much this season. So I think it's just kind of a blip right now, but I think that extension and the fact that he is being covered as a sort of huge name for Milan has me feeling good about him with Milan for the future.
Drab 4? That work for you?
Yeah. Yes. Tepid 4 right now. Drab is probably better.
There you go. You're very generous with my puns today. Thank you, Taylor.
Hey, man. It takes
All
skill.
right.
Look, for you to be paying attention to a U.S. show, I'm just appreciative already.
Yeah, I love me some US shows, Taylor.
You couldn't even say that convincingly.
Ones that don't talk about 60-man rosters, I love them. I do. All right.
To be fair to Ryan, he would not be, if we were doing a 60-man England roster, you would be equally like, do we need 60? I feel like we could do 23 and be fine. It's not just a U.S. thing. It's an international football gigantic roster thing.
The question would be, do we need international soccer? We're fine with the domestic product, right? Anyway, sorry, enough of my grumblings. Josh Sargent, he's flying in the Championship. A brace for Norwich in their win over Stoke at the weekend. He's got 11 goals on the season. And as we've covered earlier, Joe, in this episode, seems to be the numero uno pick for the striker spot in this squad.
I think this upcoming March window is a really, really big opportunity for Josh Sargent, which I recognize is not a hot take, given that he is the obvious starter for this team coming up in these Nations League games. But it really does feel to me like the 9 spot is still somewhat up for grabs. If Ricardo Pepi was in this camp, I would feel differently. But Ricardo Pepi is injured, and we think he's going to be back in May, which means he'll probably be back in time for the Gold Cup, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago. But do we know for sure? No, we don't. And if Josh Sargent is awesome in this camp, does it add some more questions to that whole equation? You bet it does. So I am fascinated to see what kind of performances Josh Sargent puts in this window. If he's got Reyna and Pulisic and Weah around him in the attack, it wouldn't shock me if he puts in some really, really good performances, because I think these U.S. strikers are the ones that are going to really benefit when they have that type of creative talent around them, because I don't think, maybe other than Balogun and Sargent occasionally, I don't think Pepi is really this player. None of them are amazing at creating their own shot. So I think Sargent still has work to do to really bet himself into this U.S. team as the guy. But he's in a spot now where he can get back into that conversation in a real way. And he's in great form. Confidence should be high. He's been putting the ball in the back of the net, as Taylor said earlier. I think there's a lot to like about Josh Sargent right now. And I'm really intrigued to watch him next month.
Yeah. Yep. Agree entirely. And I'll just add, I think at times with Sargent, he's been in Berhalter teams that maybe weren't getting him the ball in advantageous situations, or he was being asked to do a lot, or maybe asked to do more than he was able to kind of process in the moment or fully get comfortable with. But by the time he did, there's other options, there's other number 9s to be considered. And so now we have a situation, as I said previously, in which he is the number 9 for this team in this camp. And it's the number 9 under Pochettino, a manager that I think can give him specific instructions and is going to be very demanding. We've heard that from so many different players. Tim Ream, chief amongst them, has talked about the intensity of trainings and the high expectations, but also how good Pochettino is at delivering his instructions, at sort of relaying tactical advice, but then also little sort of wrinkles along the way. And that is what makes me the most excited about Josh Sargent in this camp. He's probably the player I'm most excited to see, because I don't think we've seen him in a positive situation for the U.S. in as long as I can remember. And so for him to come into this camp, it's sort of a fresh start, even if it's not like his first appearance for the U.S. in a while.
Sure.
It's just, to me, feels like it's an opportunity for him to start anew and see what he can do with a bit of confidence coming in from club level into a national team that has this high-profile manager, and to see if it clicks or if it doesn't. It's just a thing that could be really exciting, but even if it's not, at least we know things, as opposed to right now where we don't know what we don't know.
We don't indeed. Some Sargent major opportunities ahead. Oh, the wordplay today is just flowing out of me. One other player to speak of who plays in an aggressively yellow shirt in his domestic team, Gio Reyna, as we mentioned earlier, who got his second Bundesliga start this past weekend when BVB drank Union Berlin's milkshake. It seems, Joe, that Niko Kovac is putting some faith in Gio Reyna. Giving him... Yeah? Is that good?
I feel like that one went way over my head. Please continue.
Wait, which one? The
milkshake thing. And what's the reference there? What am I missing?
Oh, Joe.
I mean, I know, Joe. You don't watch movies. You are, I believe, 11 years old. It's been established. I apologize, but I drink your milkshake. Come on, man. That was like a cultural phenomenon. It's There Will Be Blood. Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, classic,
yeah.
Classic.
It is the thing. So that's
it literally is.
Yes. It's one of the more iconic lines from 21st century cinema. But anyway, go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, Joe. Please
I just didn't expect a non-90s reference from Ryan. That's where I fell down, I think, on that one.
That is fair. Also, I apologize for how pretentious I just sounded.
No, you're good.
I immediately got mad at myself for saying
I'm
that.
sure I'm in the minority on this. Don't get me wrong. I was just absolutely baffled. Yeah, Gio Reyna started, which is great timing after we talked about him last week in detail. I liked a lot of that, and he played 70 minutes against Union Berlin, the milkshake derby, as people are calling it. Really exciting stuff. Started as this left-sided central midfielder in a 4-3-3. Wasn't super involved. I honestly don't think there was a lot of notable stuff from Gio in this game. He had 31 touches. The notable thing, though, overall, is that he started the game. He's been playing regularly off the bench. It's just been a lot, as we talked about recently, of 4 minutes here, 11 minutes here, 18 minutes here. And to see him get a 70-minute appearance is a good sign. It still feels like he's in complete, not quite turmoil, I suppose, but things are really uncertain right now. Seb Stafford-Blower had a good piece of The Athletic that cited how Dortmund have been open to a permanent transfer for quite some time. He put that 20 million euro figure on it, which I think you and I have talked a little bit about as well recently, Taylor. It doesn't feel like that's changing anytime soon, and nothing that we said, that was last week, it feels like, maybe 2 weeks ago, last week, yeah. Nothing we said about Reyna and his future last week feels altered based off of this weekend, other than the immediate future, which is his role with Dortmund literally this season, and potentially his role with the USMNT. So nothing is really altered for me on the Gio front, but good to see him playing more than 20 minutes at a time.
I don't know if you can actually answer the question or conundrum I am now about to present you with, but having read those reports, having done the episode we did about Reyna, where it felt like something was the final straw, that they were now willing to move him, that he was the specific phrasings about they had run out of patience or whatever. It just felt to me like, well, that's that. And so when I checked the Dortmund score and looked at the lineups and stuff this weekend, I did it very much like, obviously Gio Reyna didn't play. And to see him start that game was a bit of a head scratcher to me. And I am sort of in a confused state at present with Gio Reyna of are they done with him? Is he still going to get opportunities? If he does well, is this going to be like the Real Madrid Beckham thing where actually, never mind, we do want to keep him, we're pretty happy with him, no thank you. It doesn't seem like that will end up being the case. It does seem like maybe they will entertain offers and will move him on and don't just want to freeze him out and decrease his value significantly. But it's an odd one that they are done with him but still playing him at the same time. At least it's odd to me.
Maybe I'm oversimplifying this, and it's quite possible that I am. I interpreted this as we have this weekend game flanked by Champions League games that we care about more. Mm-hmm. So I basically interpreted this as fairly simple squad rotation. Okay. Maybe I'm missing something there. I guess we're gonna find out.
No, I think that's probably the logical answer and a good point, Joe. Okay, so that does make things make a bit more sense because, as I said, if he hadn't played this weekend, I still probably would have had him in my team because he's Gio Reyna, but at the same time, it would have felt less I don't know, substantive. It would have felt more like, I guess they're just going to like give him opportunities to kind of keep him in the shop window with those minutes this weekend, combined with like occasional appearances off the bench. It wouldn't have felt quite so strong. And so I end up being like, yeah, I guess he's in there for sure. Let's see how it goes versus I guess he's in there. I don't really know.
I think we actually might both be a little off base on this. I do think rotation probably is a part of it. I'm reading now that there are some reports that Julian Brandt had a little bit of a muscle injury, and Brandt has been eating up a lot of minutes in that Dortmund midfield. So almost certainly that factors into this as well.
Oh wow, I'm less bullish about Gio Reyna than I was at the start of this conversation, but here we are.
You should be maximally bullish about Gio Reyna because he's awesome and he plays great soccer.
And yeah, let's go Gio. There we go. All right, USMNT Weekly, Taylor.
I mean, I think your lack of bullishness is the appropriate position to be in. Because I think it's just the reality that I think he could be a really good player. He could be a difference maker. We just haven't seen that from him in quite some time. And when we have, it's been for, to use Joe's phrasing, these kinds of games in Concacaf. So I would love to see him get that move. I would love to see him start consistently. I would love to see him in that situation in which we're like, yeah, it's a slam dunk, no doubt. And I think for Joe, he's a slam dunk, no doubt, no matter where he's playing, if he's playing, whatever. For me, it's just like you want that level of confidence and consistency in performance, and we haven't seen that. So I think it's fair to be sort of uncertain about Reyna as he comes into this camp. At the same time, I think it's going to be the way things are until we get more clarity this summer.
Boo Taylor because he's right. Boo, boo, boo.
Hey,
thank you, Joe.
We don't boo tastemakers on this podcast. This is what we do here. And
yeah, you know what, Joe? Both pinkies are now flourished. How do you feel about that? How's that for tastemaking?
Joke's on you. With the way I have you positioned on my screen, I can't see either of your pinkies. I know listener can, though. I think listener can. Maybe they can't. Ha-ha. Darn.
Watcher can.
Got
Watcher
me there.
Can, Joe.
Oh, watcher can. Yeah, listener can't see. I can tell you that much. Listener totally can't see.
All right. That is USMNT Weekly. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on this journey. We, of course, will have this episode coming every week throughout the season, throughout the year. There's no seasons. It's just a year. Taylor Rockwell, thank you very much indeed for your contributions here. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. Appreciate you, and I apologize for talking about my pinkies for so long.
Like 30 seconds was too much? Is that
too
what you
long.
mean?
Pretty much, yeah. I think 0 seconds is the appropriate amount.
Yeah, we're agreed. Thank you very much. Joe Lowry, a pleasure as always, sir.
Yeah, pleasure was mine, Ryan. I'm now imagining watcher and listener as two completely different people with two entirely distinct personalities. Really, really like this. I imagine watcher is maybe like a bit, I don't know, kind of a bit more in touch with like modern fashion, and listener is sort of drinking maybe with their own pinky lifted up to some sort of, classy beverage. That's sort of the image I'm putting on both these people. Both excellent traits, being up to date and being classy, but that's sort of where I'm picturing watcher and listener.
Okay. You've made it sound less creepy than I had it in my head when you first brought up watcher and listener, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Happy to do it.
All right, let's close this one out. Listener/watcher, thank you very much for joining us on this here episode. We'll be back on the feed very shortly, but for now, bye!